This video is sponsored by RZ Mask. I pulled this early mid-century modern style chest of drawers out of someone's trash. It was in pretty rough shape when I brought it home, but like all of my trash finds, I was pretty sure that I could fix it up and turn it back into a piece that someone will cherish again. This poor chest was worse for wear when I found it. It had these amazing handles, but they were super tarnished and corroded. The veneer around the top edge here was just toast, and the top was pretty trash too. Because of all of that, I was planning on painting this one in order to save it, but I very quickly ended up changing directions. I went ahead and dug into my usual prepping process here to assess things a little further and see what else I could find while I was cleaning. I always start by pulling all of the drawers out and taking a look for any loose bottoms or broken runners. And I usually find something left behind in these pieces, but I definitely wasn't expecting to find an entire sporting goods store. My boys were pretty excited about these bonus gifts. I vacuumed out the dust out of the bottom and washed everything down with some TSP alternative. That will cut through all of the dirt on this thing and also break down any old furniture polish or wax residue that's on the surface, so that when I get to sanding, I'm not grinding any of that down into the wood pores. I also removed all of the hardware and set that aside for later. Since a lot of the edge veneer was already gone and the rest of it was barely holding on, I just grabbed a metal putty knife and peeled most of it right off. To get the bits that were still holding on, I grabbed my Surf Prep sander, my RZ dust mask, and some 80 grit sandpaper to blast off those last little bits. This mask is made for the dust life. RZ masks and RZ filters are specifically designed with comfort and safety in mind. They've got multiple shell materials, shell styles, and filter types to choose from. An RZ mask is really ideal for a variety of tasks and provides a really comfortable PPE for all day use. Their styles come in multiple sizes so you can get a good fit for your unique face shape, and they're really easy to put on and take off. They have an adjustable nose piece so your glasses won't fog up. They're machine washable and have replaceable filters that catch 99.9% of particulates down to 0.1 of a micron. Check out rzmask.com to find the right style and fit for you, and use my code in the description box to save 20%. Next, I switched out my sandpaper to a 120 grit to see what I could do about the damage on the top. I didn't want to be removing a lot of material here and risk sanding through this thin veneer, so I went really slow with this medium grit, and the rest of the finish just powdered away and revealed some incredible walnut wood grain. Well, now I'm in a predicament. My plan was to paint this whole dresser in a solid color and maybe leave some of the walnut exposed on the drawers because they weren't quite as beat up. But this top sanded down so easily and so nicely. There's a couple of little chunks out of it, but I'm pretty sure with a little bit of walnut colored wood filler, they won't be an issue. But what do I do about this? I don't have anywhere local where I can get walnut veneer. I'm gonna have to think on this for a bit. Gonna have to think on this for a bit and see if there's a way that I can save this walnut. What if I paint this and maybe do a band framing out the top, leave the walnut in the middle? That'll look goofy. If I just paint this and leave everything else walnut, that will look goofy. What do I do? What do I do? Oh, there's a big hole there. All right, I'm gonna have to stop and think on this for a bit. While I pondered what to do with that giant veneerless edge around the top of the dresser, I went ahead and sanded the drawers. The inside of the top drawer had been finished with this orange stuff, and there was a really big stain on the bottom, but with some more sanding, I was able to clean it up a ton. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. And when I finally quit for the day, I Googled 2-inch walnut veneer and found a couple of options on Amazon, so I ordered one and just waited a few days for that to show up. Once my iron-on edge veneer banding had arrived and I'd picked up some walnut-colored wood filler, it was time to get back to work. The new veneer was a totally different color and tone from the stuff on the dresser, which is completely normal when working with wood. So I grabbed some of this red-toned English chestnut stain from Behr and watered it down a ton to see if I could get this new veneer a little bit closer to the original. I cut myself a little test swatch and brushed on that super light stain, and I think that helped a lot. Next, I wanted to take off the base from the box so that I could sand that and get all of the cobwebs on the bottom that I missed when I was cleaning the first time. So I just followed the screws around the inside and that popped right off. I laid the box down on its side on a drop cloth so that I could work on my new veneer without struggling against gravity. I grabbed myself a scrap piece of wood, a square, a sharp blade, and my strip of edge banding, and then set my iron on almost the highest setting. I measured out the length that I needed for the side and then cut that to a square edge. Then I laid it down where I wanted it. I kept the bottom edge flush and left any overage hanging off the top of the dresser so that I had room to cut that off later. Once I had it where I wanted it, I grabbed my hot iron and started melting that glue. You want to use a dry iron for this, no steam or spray settings, and preferably you've got a crappy old iron that you use only for garage projects so that you don't get glue melted onto your good clothes iron. This is totally a do what I say, not what I do moment. But I just moved the iron back and forth over the section until I felt the glue had melted. And then immediately after taking that heat away, I used my little block of wood here to really press and burnish that veneer down and make sure there was a super tight bond and everything was really stuck. After that had cooled for just a few minutes, I flipped the whole thing upside down onto my scrap piece of wood and used my box cutter to cut off that overage nice and flush. Hello there, little ant friend. That left me with the tiniest little lip of glue and wood, so I wrapped my block with some more sandpaper and really carefully sanded that to a nice smooth seam. And once I had that first side set, it was just rinse and repeat on the other side and the front. I sanded the rest of the original finish off of the sides, and then I noticed that this bottom brace piece was broken. So I grabbed some wood glue and a blunt tipped syringe and just loaded up that break with glue and then clamped it up and let it dry. While that was doing its thing, I moved on and got to sanding the base piece. I added a foam interface pad to my sander to help me mold around these curves, and that made for some pretty quick work. This base section is made of maple, which is a lot lighter of a wood than the walnut veneer that is on the rest of the chest. So I put that same red stain over it in an attempt to have it better match once I do my stain over the whole piece. And I also took this time to stain that new veneer strip and filled in all of the little spots on the top that needed it. Once the filler was dry, I sanded it and gave the other surfaces one last smooth out with some 180 grit sandpaper, and then used a tack cloth to pick up any dust that was sticking around. To restain this guy, I used this salmon water-based stain in number 109 walnut. I poured it into a clean piece of recycling and used their stain applicator sponge to rub it onto the chest one surface at a time. Since this stain is water-based, it's really user-friendly. It's got no odor at all, and it re-wets itself so you don't get any lap marks, and it gives a really nice, even one-coat color. You just rub it into the wood grain and then use a clean rag to wipe back the excess. It also dries nice and fast, so it can be top-coated with either an oil or water-based product in about an hour. I left my stain to dry and took the crusty hardware into the house. I filled up a pot with a 50-50 mix of water and vinegar and then boiled the handles for about 15 minutes to loosen up all of that junk. I used some tongs to pull the hardware out of the vinegar, and while it cooled down a bit, I sprinkled it with some Barkeeper's Friend. And once it was cool enough to handle, I scrubbed it with some superfine steel wool. All of that corrosion came right off, but these were only brass plated, and unfortunately a lot of that finish came off too, so I ended up needing to paint these. I dried them off really well and then took them outside and put them in a little box and sprayed on a few coats of bright gold spray paint to give them their original shiny brass look back. I had a few different options to seal up and protect this piece, but ultimately I decided on this Varathane diamond wood finish in a satin sheen. It's pretty much my go-to to use on painted projects, so I'm very familiar with how it applies and how it holds up. I gave it a really good stir and then filtered some into my gravity-fed HVLP spray gun. This product goes on really nicely with a sponge as well, but spraying is easier for me. I gave it a pretty juicy coat on the top because that's what's going to get the most wear, and then I dialed back my flow for the sides and the drawer fronts. After the first coat of poly had dried for 2 hours, I gave it a super light sand with a super fine sandpaper and then applied one more coat. I let that top coat dry overnight, and then the base got screwed back on, as did all of the original hardware. So let's take one more look at what this chest looked like when I found it. And here is the final product. I hope you enjoyed coming along for this mid-century modern restoration. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will catch you all next time.